One final transmission, 60 men, and then 63 years of haunting silence. In the height of World War II, the USS Wahoo wasn't just a submarine. She was a one-boat wolf pack. Under the legendary Commander Dudley Mush, Morton the Wahoo rewrote the rules of naval warfare with a brand of aggression that bordered on suicidal. She was the hunter that Japanese convoys feared most. But in October 1943, the hunter became the prey. The Wahoo vanished into the most heavily guarded waters on Earth, leaving behind no debris, no witnesses, and a void in the hearts of 60 American families. For decades, her fate was a ghost story told in naval mess halls. Was it a mechanical failure or a secret Japanese victory? Today, we go beyond the declassified files. We're heading 213 feet down into the icy currents of the La Perouse Strait to reveal the forensic truth. This is the story of the USS Wahoo found at last. To understand why the Wahoo's disappearance sent shockwaves through the Pacific, you first have to understand the man who turned a standard Gato-class submarine into a lethal juggernaut. In late 1942, the American submarine force was struggling. Command was often hamstrung by faulty torpedoes and a doctrine that prioritized the safety of the boat over the destruction of the enemy. Then came Lieutenant Commander Dudley "Mush" Morton. When Morton took the bridge on the final day of 1942, he didn't just change the leadership. He overhauled the DNA of underwater warfare. He threw the old Navy manual out the window and replaced it with a singular, brutal philosophy: shoot the tankers first. Morton was a visionary of aggression. While other commanders hid in the deep, Morton brought the Wahoo to the surface, transforming the submarine into a terrifying predator that hunted in broad daylight. His tactics were a radical defiance of conventional wisdom. In a move that stunned his contemporaries, Morton delegated the periscope to his executive officer, Lieutenant Dick O'Kane. This allowed the XO to focus entirely on the firing solution, while Morton maintained a God's-eye view of the entire battlefield from the conning tower. It was a revolutionary division of labor that sharpened their attack rhythm to a razor's edge. But Morton's true legend was forged in fire on the surface. He was famous for engaging Japanese escorts with his deck guns, a high-stakes, high-noon showdown that exposed the Wahoo's thin skin to direct counterfire. It was a gamble every single time. Yet the results were undeniable. Across 3 historic patrols, the Wahoo became a machine of mass destruction, sinking over 90,000 tons of shipping and earning 6 battle stars. Morton had built a reputation for invincibility, but he was playing a dangerous game of escalation. He was intentionally pushing the Wahoo into the Sea of Japan, a heavily fortified corridor the Japanese considered their private lake. By the time the 7th Patrol began, the Wahoo wasn't just a submarine anymore. It was a symbol of American defiance. But even legends have a breaking point, and Morton was about to lead his crew into a trap from which there was no escape. By September 1943, the USS Wahoo was a household name back home. But in the Pacific, a cold frustration was boiling over in Commander Morton's gut. His 6th Patrol had been a nightmare of mechanical betrayal. The standard Mark 14 torpedoes, the supposed backbone of the fleet, had been plagued by duds and erratic runs, leaving Morton to watch helplessly as prime targets escaped his grasp. He was a man who lived to attack, and he refused to let faulty engineering stall his momentum again. For the Wahoo's 7th Patrol, Morton made a calculated, high-stakes gamble. He loaded his tubes with the experimental Mark 18 electric torpedoes. Unlike the steam-powered Mark 14, the Mark 18 left no telltale wake of bubbles on the surface. It was a ghost in the water, invisible to the enemy, until the moment of impact. But the technology was still largely untested in the heat of combat. It was slower, temperamental, and carried the terrifying risk of a circular run. A malfunction where the torpedo could loop back to strike the very boat that fired it. Morton wasn't just bringing new weapons. He was bringing them into the most dangerous theater imaginable, the Sea of Japan. To the Japanese, this was their Emperor's Lake, a vital supply artery connecting the home islands to occupied territories. To an American submarine, it was a suicide trap, a shallow, narrow bottleneck guarded by dense minefields and relentless air patrols. As the Wahoo slipped through the northern straits, the gamble initially seemed to pay off. The silent Mark 18s began their work. Japanese records later confirmed a string of rapid, devastating sinkings, including the passenger cargo ship Konran Maru. The carnage was so severe, it even made Japanese news broadcasts. Morton was effectively strangling the Empire's lifeline from the inside, but the aggression that made Morton a legend was about to become his undoing. On October 11th, 1943, as the Wahoo attempted to exit through the La Perouse Strait, Morton made one final characteristic choice. He opted for a surface transit to maximize his speed. It was the fastest way out of the trap, but it turned the Pacific's most feared hunter into a visible silhouette against the morning tide. In those narrow waters, the hunter's luck finally ran out. The Japanese were no longer searching for a ghost. They were looking at a target. On October 11th, 1943, the relentless rhythm of the USS Wahoo's war came to a violent, echoing halt. After the depth charges stopped and the Japanese patrol planes returned to base, a terrifying silence settled over the La Perouse Strait. Back in Pearl Harbor, the clocks kept ticking, but the Wahoo never checked in. By December, the U.S. Navy officially struck her from the register. For the families of the 60 men on board, the war didn't end with a victory parade. It ended with a telegram that offered no answers, only the agonizing ambiguity of missing in action. For the next 6 decades, the Wahoo was a ghost, frozen in time. But the world above her was changing, in ways that made her recovery nearly impossible. As the smoke of World War II cleared a new kind of conflict, emerged the Cold War. The La Perouse Strait, the very graveyard where the Wahoo lay, became one of the most strategically sensitive flashpoints on the planet. This narrow strip of water separates the northern tip of Japan from the Russian island of Sakhalin. It was the front line between the West and the Soviet Union, a guarded corridor bristling with sonar arrays and underwater sensors. Throughout the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, the wreck of the Wahoo wasn't just a historical site. It was a geopolitical prisoner. American survey ships couldn't venture into these waters without risking an international incident. The Soviet Navy viewed any Western presence in the strait as an act of espionage. The one-boat Wolfpack was trapped behind an iron curtain of water, her exact coordinates lost in a sea of conflicting Japanese wartime reports and Russian military secrecy. Decades turned into half a century. To the public, Morton and his crew became legends of a distant past, their stories relegated to history books. But for the aging children and siblings of the crew, the silence was a weight that never lightened. They lived with the haunting knowledge that their loved ones were somewhere, in the deep yet unreachable, due to the maps and minds of a new era. It would take the collapse of an empire and a rare moment of international cooperation to finally crack the seal on this 63-year-old mystery. The search for the Wahoo was no longer just about naval history. It was a race against time to bring closure to the last living witnesses of her glory. The wall of political silence finally began to crumble in the mid-1990s as the Cold War thawed. A unique alliance formed, one that would have been unthinkable just a decade prior. Led by a relative of Commander Morton, the Wahoo Project Group brought together American researchers, Japanese historians, and Australian technical experts. But the final piece of the puzzle required the cooperation of the Russian Federation. In July 2006, the Russian dive team Iskra set out into the treacherous currents of the La Perouse Strait, carrying with them the fragmented records of two former enemies to find one lost legend. The search was a grueling test of technology and patience. The strait is a chaotic environment where powerful tides drag sensors off course and thick fog masks the horizon. They were hunting for a ghost in over 200 feet of water, searching for a silhouette that had been softened by 63 years of marine growth and shifting silt. Then the side-scan sonar pinged. A long, slender object appeared on the monitor, resting defiant and upright on the seafloor. Its dimensions were a perfect match for a Gato-class boat. It was in the right place at the right depth. But in the world of naval archaeology, a shadow on a screen isn't a victory, it's only a lead. The team deployed a remotely operated vehicle, or ROV, to descend into the turbid, lightless depths. As the ROV's lights cut through the murk, the mangled steel of the Wahoo slowly resolved into view. The camera panned across the hull, moving toward the bridge, and there, it was the smoking gun. The conning tower was a jagged ruin, torn open by a massive, violent force. It was the forensic echo of a Japanese pilot's report from October 11th, 1943. A direct hit from an aerial bomb that had finally halted the one-boat wolf pack. The Wahoo hadn't simply vanished. She had gone down in the heat of a combined air and sea assault that lasted an entire day. Seeing the damage was a haunting moment of clarity. The archives had provided the theory, but the wreckage provided the truth. The hunter had been cornered, but even in her final moments, she remained on an even keel, as if still on patrol. The 63-year wait for answers was over. The silence had finally been broken. On October 31st, 2006, the United States Navy officially confirmed what the cameras in the La Perouse Strait had already whispered to the world. The search was finally over. For the families of the 60 men who had vanished in the autumn of 1943, the news brought a weight of finality that had been missing for over 6 decades. The overdue notices and the decades of agonizing speculation were replaced by a definitive location, a sacred site, where their fathers, grandfathers, and brothers remained at their posts, forever young and forever defiant. The discovery of the USS Wahoo did more than just solve a maritime mystery. It validated the legend of the one-boat wolf pack. Commander Dudley "Mush" Morton's aggressive doctrine had been a catalyst for American victory in the Pacific, proving that a single boat, led with relentless courage, could paralyze an empire. His tactics carried an immense price, but in the brutal arithmetic of war, his sacrifice and the loss of the Wahoo paved the way for the victory that followed. Today, Morton is remembered not just for the 93,000 tons of shipping he sent to the bottom, but for the spirit of audacity he breathed into the silent service. The Wahoo now rests on an even keel, a silent sentinel in the dark, icy waters between two former enemies. In the tradition of the United States Navy, she is not considered lost. She is on eternal patrol. The sea has reclaimed the steel, but the story of the 60 men inside belongs to history. Their silence has been replaced by a legacy that continues to resonate with every sailor who braves the deep. History has a way of burying its greatest stories in the shadows of the past, and it's up to us to bring them back to the surface. If you found the journey of the Wahoo as powerful as we did, please consider subscribing to the channel. By joining our community, you help us keep these memories alive and ensure that the sacrifices of men like Morton and his crew are never forgotten. Hit the notification bell to join us as we uncover the next great mystery of the deep. Until then, the Wahoo is no longer missing. She has finally come home.